don't know me, Brad Chan. I'm the founder of Haymarket HQ, but it's also great to have Eddie here. Great to have the audience here, particularly those that are here for the first time. Special thanks to PDF who have helped to organise the event. Tonight is really about getting to know Eddie a little bit better. I sometimes talk about having a D&M in public, and so that's what we hope to do tonight. Hopefully peel back some layers and just understand some personal insights about him. And like you peel an onion, sometimes you get tears, so that's okay if we get some tears as well. We'll see how we go. So I believe our guest tonight needs no introduction, but I will briefly introduce him because there are some things that some of you may not be aware of. So he is a YouTube star with over 25 million views, probably counting every day, which is probably why you've been called the Kim Kardashian of maths teaching.
I will never forgive Adam Spencer for giving me that title and constantly repeating it every time he and I are in public together. Not cool, but sure.
Also selected as one of the top 10 teachers in the world, awarded Australia's Local Hero last year, author of this book, which he is also selling tonight, television host of Teenage Boss, education ambassador at the University of Sydney. Last year took up a role with the Department of Education as a master teacher, and he also still manages to teach classes at Cherrybook Tech. Okay, so that's a lot of work, and a lot of that's just happened in the last couple of years as well. Can I ask, firstly, is that something you planned, or is it just something that fell into your lap?
I would really love to be able to take full credit for strategically having written out a 5-year plan and then hit those milestones. And probably by the way that I'm prefacing that answer, you can tell, no, it was not completely planned. Though there were things that I did see and did intentionally try and do. As an example, I don't know how many of you, are familiar with the fact that in New South Wales, we have an education system whereby English and mathematics and science, they're all compulsory for a long time, like 11 years. So we call these the core subjects. And so for that reason, we need a lot of English and maths and science teachers. Now, we've got loads of English teachers. We've even got a lot of science teachers. Maths teachers, not so much. Here's how few maths teachers we've got. Let me try and paint a picture for you. And I'm going to paint you a picture in numbers because that's just how I roll. If you've got qualified maths teachers, I went to the University of Sydney, which is why I've taken up that role with them this year. If you've got qualified mathematics teachers who went and got a degree in mathematics, then you tend to, if you have a choice, place them on those senior classes, year 11, year 12, that's their HSC, it's really important. As a consequence, years 7 to 10 in a high school, they kind of end up getting the less attractive end of the stick. So here's how few mathematics teachers we have teaching 7 to 10. On average, in a New South Wales public school, we have 40% of those year 7 to 10 classes taught by a teacher who's doing their very best, but is not qualified in teaching mathematics. And we would love that situation to be better, but those mathematics teachers don't exist. Now, 40%, that sounds like a lot, right? But let me try and emphasize it to you even more. If there's, in this room, there's about 100-ish people in this room. So I'm going to go with, okay, so this side of the room over here, you're about 40 people. There's about 60 over here, okay? So you all get to be the lucky 60, year 7s. You all get a maths teacher. Sorry, guys, someone doesn't make the cut. It just has to be somebody. So there's 60 of you. You get a math teacher in year 7. But then this happens in year 8 as well. So in year 8, only 36 of you are going to have a maths teacher again. And then in year 9, and then in year 10, by the end of it, just about the number of people who are standing up around the edges of the room, only about 12 people will have had a maths teacher who was qualified and trained all 4 of those years. The rest of us who are all sitting, at least one of those years, probably more than one, we didn't have someone who was qualified. And so for me, being able to have that role where I could make a broader impact, that was something I did try for, and that was intentional. The rest of it, the universe has been very kind to me.
Great. So can I ask then, do you see yourself more as a mathematician or a teacher or an educator?
That's a really hard question for me to answer because there's parts of me that feel like both of those both of those are really legitimate answers. Let me try and put it to you this way. I am professionally, I'm a teacher first. In fact, I have some friends who work at university who are, I like to call them capital M mathematicians, like that's mathematicians in their title, and they would be really, really cross if I said I was a mathematician in the same room as them. They're like, don't compare you to us, Eddie, like we're on another plane of existence. So there's that sort of sense in which my primary thing is to work with children. I love working with young people and empowering them and discovering what they love and what they're good at and helping them, flourish. But I'm also a really big believer, and I've sort of gained this conviction. I didn't have it when I was at school, so for any of the kids in the room, if you're thinking this way, I want to challenge you. I used to think certain people were maths people, and then there was just the rest of us who weren't. Certain people just have a knack for numbers and for geometry and all that, and then the rest of us just try to make do. I thought there were maths people and there weren't maths people. But the longer I teach and the longer that I immerse myself in this field, the more I come to think, actually, everyone is born to be a mathematician. Everyone is a mathematician when you realize all it means to do maths is to find patterns, to recognize them and to try and understand them. And we're all pattern recognizing machines. In fact, we're so good at seeing patterns, we sometimes see patterns when they're not there. Did anyone else, when they were younger, did you ever look at the clouds and be like, that one looks like a fish? That one looks like Brad's face. We would find patterns in randomness, and that's that mathematical instinct that we all have. So I'd kind of like to be really terrible and say both.
Okay. Show of hands, who liked maths when they were younger? Okay, there's a few of you. It's fair to say, Eddie, maths wasn't your strongest subject at school. You probably had a preference for English and history and some of those kind of things. We'll come back to that, but I just want to touch on your childhood a little bit because I think we are a product of our upbringing. So obviously of Asian background. So tell us about your parents' style of parenting. Was it tiger parents or were they different?
My parents came to Australia in the early 70s. And for me, growing up underneath them, I kind of viewed them, I think, the way that a lot of children of migrants do. I once upon a time thought it was mostly an Asian thing, and I went to uni, met this guy whose parents are from Hungary, and relaying to each other what our upbringings were like. It's like we called each other brothers from another mother. Bit cheesy. Sounds slightly better than sisters from another mister, but that's another story. And that kind of migrant experience of, look, we came here to this country, we left behind family, we left behind security, we left behind status and confidence to know what was coming next. We did that very deliberately to secure for you, in most cases, especially in a country like Australia, access to an education that just doesn't exist where we came from. We paid a great price and sacrificed many things in order for you to obtain that. And so I sort of grew up with my brother and sister and I'm the youngest of three. By the way, just a quick question. Who else here is the youngest in their family? Anyone else? Okay, cool. I just wanted to check because you guys understand what it's like. There's lots of pictures of your brothers and sisters growing up, and then there's you as a baby, and then suddenly I'm just 15 years old. I don't exist for 14 years. I grew up watching them and learning from them and my parents that you were here, these opportunities were bought for you at a price. So don't waste them. But, when you say tiger parenting, I only came to appreciate this when I became a parent myself, which is often the way. I don't think my parents were tiger parents at all. So they really, very deliberately, I think, broke the mold. My brother, sister, and I, in our choices growing up, with regard to school, with regard to career, in many ways, we kind of didn't do what they wanted us to do, but they really gave us space to operate and make our own choices and often make our own mistakes. And I'm really grateful for the way that they did that because in many ways, I wouldn't be a teacher today, which arguably is a huge part of my identity and who I am, if they hadn't have given us that space.
Okay, let me challenge that a little bit. So you're saying you had some flexibility from your parents. In saying that, you went to James Roos Agricultural College, which is a selective school. It's, every year it's number one in the state in terms of the Year 12 results. So you went to an extremely academic school. A lot of them did coaching and tutoring and all that kind of stuff. and a lot of them come out studying the same type of degrees at university, law and medicine, all those typical things. So did you feel like you had that flexibility at the kind of school that you went to?
I guess there is this factor in which, you know, if you asked a fish what water was, they'd say, what's water? You know, this is just the air. Well, it's not the air that they breathe. Well, it kind of is the air they breathe. Sorry, I'm getting on a tangent. When you are immersed in an environment, and when that is all that you know, and it's very difficult to see outside of that bubble, I'll completely admit, you know, when I was at school, I remember being reasonably intelligent in comparison to my friends at primary school, and then I arrived at high school, and suddenly I was a very little fish in a very big pond. And I sort of came to realize, all right, that's cool. I am not the smartest, okay, I'm not the 10th smartest. Okay, I'm just somewhere down the bottom. Okay, that's fine. I can interact with that. But I was quite okay with that. For me, my identity was never really, you know, fixated on like how well did you do in comparison to others. I saw that, you know, this is not what most people tend to think of as the stereotype. But for me, when I think back to my time in high school, I remember all of the extracurricular stuff that I did. I remember being an army cadet and trying to pry leeches off my leg when we had hikes through really wet weather. I remember being a drama student, and we would hold stage productions. We would, you know, an evening time like this, everyone would file in. There'd be about this number of people in the audience, and we would try and memorize our lines. We might write a script. One year, which singed in my memory, I wasn't going to be one of the acting roles. I designed the set and the handouts that people got. And so I was just sitting back, enjoying the whole show, and everyone was working hard. And there was this point where one of the characters was meant to dramatically exit the stage and walk out through the audience and then leave the hall. And that character did that and was about to, you know, slam the doors and get them out of the way, except for the fact that the doors were locked. And so my friend, who was acting, went straight with full force into the door and shattered his kneecap. Now, we're about 2/3 of the way. We're at the end of the second act of a 3-act play. And my friends came to me and they said, Eddie, Ashwin has shattered his kneecap. And I said, that's terrible. And they said, no, you don't understand. Ashwin has shattered his kneecap, and they thrust a script in my hand. And I had to try and get on the stage. And, you know, it's like, oh, look, everyone. There's Lord Wessex. He looks different to what he had a haircut and he's not wearing a costume. But there's Lord Wessex. And those kinds of memories for me, that's, you know, having all that adrenaline going through, those kinds of things were really what I took away from my high school experience.
Yeah, okay. I know in primary school, we spoke earlier in the week, you were bullied in primary school, experienced a bit of racism, maybe you didn't quite fit in. Did you feel you fit in high school then?
That experience at primary school really was very lonely for me, and there were a lot of factors that went into that. I mentioned before that I was the youngest of 3 children. I'm a lot younger than my brother and sister, who are quite close together. And so as a consequence, I kind of was, even within my own family, was just kind of a bit of a, I was going to say third wheel, fifth wheel? Yeah, I was the spare that no one looked. And actually, my 2 older siblings who look very much alike, they looked just like my mum, and then I looked quite different. And then there was always the joke like, ha, you're adopted. They found that really funny, me not so much. So for me, that was a whole, just not being able to find where's a place where I can belong and I can be liked. When I came to high school, that did change dramatically. And I think that was part of, you know, my mum really gave me that sense of there's a time in which your role is to be patient with what's happening around you in life, and you can't change what people are how they're going to respond to you necessarily. That's not in your control. But what you do have in your control is your response to that. And that was something which obviously was a lot easier said than done, but being able to patiently await that time when I could find an environment in which I actually fit much better, that did come in high school when I was 12, 13 years old.
Yeah, okay. Always easier in hindsight. And so at school, I mean, and around that age, those teenage years, well, you know, we make choices which also affect our older years. You spoke about drama. How do you think the choices to study drama have, I guess, impacted your later career?
I mentioned before that I would love to have taken credit for really having thoughtfully planned things out, but as was the case before, I didn't think that, for me, I just liked doing drama. It was just kind of fun, and it was entertaining, and in the middle of, your stressful HSC, it just gave me a bit of an outlet, a valve to just kind of relax and express myself. So for me, there was never really any design behind it, but then I came to realize, as an educator, and really in so many different kinds of roles that we can perform, being able to convey, to communicate not just an idea, but also an emotion, and to change people's minds and the way that they feel about something, that is hugely important. In fact, as a mathematics teacher, I'd say that less than 50% of my job is transmitting knowledge and ideas and definitions from my brain to a student. Much more of my task is actually getting people on board and motivating them to do the work of the learner, which is much less about what I say and do, and it's much more about what they do. They're the active participants. And so for me, being able to learn those things, really simple little things. I'll give you an example. In drama class, we did improvisation. Improvisation is about you get on a stage and there's no script and there's no characters. You just kind of make it up with a few little suggestions. You can say, okay, you've just landed on a planet and you're astronauts, go. And that's it. And you make up everything. And we learned really simple rules of improvisation, like always say yes. When you're improvising with someone and Brad, you give me some weird idea, I don't say, that's a terrible idea, actor Brad. Let's do something else. You just say yes and you run with it. And that's what I do in the classroom all the time. A student gives me an answer which is not the answer I was looking at. I could shut that student down and say, no, William, have I not taught you anything? Haven't you been paying attention? I'm a complete failure. I could do that and crush William's heart. And he's going to know not to answer me next time because I'll humiliate him. Sorry, William. Instead, I'll say, no, that's interesting. How did you get that? What was the thought process underneath that? And we would together work out. Actually, William was probably answering a different question correctly, just not the one I was thinking of. Maybe I articulated it unclearly. Those are lessons which I learned from drama, which literally I use every single day.
Yeah, we can see that too. So one of the criticisms of schools, selective schools like James Roos, is they're very academic. They come out with top scores, but those graduates don't necessarily succeed in life. They don't succeed they don't rise to leadership levels and all those kind of things. One of the things that's often said is missing some of the essential skills you need, around social skills and communication skills and networking and all those kind of things. And there's, I guess, an over-focus on the academic side within those kind of schools. You stand out as someone that has very strong communication skills, and I think that's the thing that's allowed you to, I guess, reach a much wider audience. So let me ask you, do you feel you had those skills naturally from a young age, or was it something you had to work at?
I definitely did not have those skills at a young age. In fact, part of what pushed me into studying drama early on when I was 14 years old was the fact I was just terrified of, that feeling that just slowly develops in your gut if you have to give a presentation at work and you're like, okay, you're watching the agenda and you're like, oh, here I come. And then you just, that ball of nerves and anxiety about what you're going to say and how people are going to look at you and the questions they're going to ask, and you're going to come out looking like an idiot. That was, for me, that colored so much of my my life when I was younger that I wanted to do something about it. And I think that was part of why my parents were quite happy to encourage me in that direction. Something we were talking about before is that if you've ever done a personality test, there's this famous personality test called the Myers-Briggs personality test, and you get 4 letters that indicate sort of where you sit in different personality aspects. And one of the things they look at is introversion and extroversion. And we might get onto this later, but I'm really morbidly curious. So every 3 to 4 years, I just sort of redo the test just to see what it's like. And they always fluctuate, all the different things. But one thing that's remarkably consistent for me is I'm always about an 85 to 90% introvert. That's what I consistently come up as. But as a teacher, I have to develop and learn a lot of extroverted skills. And so I'm a big believer in, once upon a time, because we could not peer inside the human brain, we thought of this amazing, 3 kilo mass as this fixed object that it was wired the way it was wired, and that's kind of, you're born in a particular way and you'll just have that brain. But we now know so much more. We have patients who have huge parts of their brain carved out because of injury, and the rest of the brain, we watch it, we use functional MRIs to watch the brain rewire itself. And we call this neuroplasticity. For me, that's a real indicator that for myself and for my students, there's a huge amount of change that's possible, even when there isn't a natural affinity for a skill or a subject.
Yeah, great point. And I'm an introvert myself, and I actually did drama classes in my mid to late 20s. And so, because I realised I wasn't very good at public speaking. And so I think it's a good lesson for, I guess, the audience that, it's never too late to start, and it's an essential skill that you use across, many different areas.
I just want to jump in and say, anyone who gets the opportunity to take, like if work's doing some course or something like that, or if you're a student, you get to have some kind of opportunity to choose, the more uncomfortable you feel doing something like that, the more I think you need to do it. So I just encourage people to get out of their comfort zone and take up that opportunity if it's there.
Great. Still on those school years, there were probably some pivotal moments in your life as well. Your mother passed away in year 12.
The year, a few months after year 12.
Yeah. What would you say are the things that also greatly influenced you and, the outcome of your life since?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd probably add to that, and they kind of fit together, so I'll try not to be too incoherent. You mentioned my mum. So in year 10, so I would have been 15 or 16, my mum was diagnosed with lung cancer. So that was, for us, completely out of left field. There's no history in our family. She was a super healthy person as well. She didn't smoke. There were none of the risk factors that we usually associate with lung cancer. And so for us, that just kind of rewrote so many aspects of our life. My dad, he sort of semi-retired so that he could look after her. I was the only child in the family still at school, so my brother and sister were sort of engaged in career and university and really high stakes stuff. So for me, I kind of became this part-time carer, which was really weird for me. I'm a sort of stereotypical, last child, kind of babied along for a long time, and suddenly I had all this responsibility to take on. Like I had to do stupid things like make my own lunch. I had to do less stupid things like be the one to wake up in the middle of the night and change my mum's oxygen tank. And that just kind of all happened together really quickly and very suddenly. And Mum, to her credit, she fought and fought and fought. She lasted 3 years, even though she was given a 6-month prognosis. And I kind of think she wanted to hold on until she watched my sister get married, which is really a great thing for her to be able to see. But that obviously, that shaped me very deeply. It gives me, it's the whole way I look at my own students now. And one of the things that was really, in a room this large, there's plenty of you. Statistically, there's at least 30 of you who either a close family member or a friend has been diagnosed with cancer. And for a lot of people, they don't want others to know about that. And that was certainly my mum and dad's point of view. And so I would just kind of turn up to school with just these huge bags under my eyes because I hadn't slept. And no one knew why that was happening. And so I look at my own students and I think about what it is that they're going through and how much of it, and of my friends and my colleagues and the people sitting in this room who all have their own deep, amazing story that I just see the tip of. So that was hugely important to me. At the same time, probably the other major factor, apart from the things we've already mentioned, was that my faith started to have a lot more of a role in my life. So I'm a Christian. Bit of a funny story, actually. My dad, I mentioned they came here in the 70s. My dad just brought our family to church because he was like, what's the religion of Australia? The religion in Malaysia is Islam. Here it's Christian. Okay, I guess we'll just go to church. And for him, he was kind of like, yeah, cool. It's just, people just eat. It's a friendly environment, but they chat about some stuff and they really love this book. But that's fine, whatever, But that ended up, as an adolescent, I started to think about that seriously myself. And that's actually one of the things I love about working with high schoolers. They come in at age 12, they leave at age 18, and in that 6 years, they go through this profound and in some cases violent change in their personality and identity. And when I was going through that, that was when I started to, when you're suddenly staring down the death of a loved one, it makes you ask really deep questions about what matters in life. How am I going to live, and how will that have implications for the rest of my life going forward and my family as well? And so for me, that was a huge contributing factor. A big part of why I became a teacher is not just because I love learning and I love helping others learn, but I wanted to serve, and it's a great service profession, and that came from my identity as a Christian. So probably those were the real anchors of what sort of shaped who I am and the journey that I've gone on.
Yeah, and I think good that you mentioned your Christian faith. And we spoke on the way here in the car how during uni you also considered stopping teaching and going to Bible college and entering ministry full time.
Yeah, I was really serious about it. Most people know I'm a maths teacher, which is why if you have a look, I'm just glad I didn't wear the same shirt and tie. If you have a look in the background of this picture, this picture was taken by the photography team who work with the Australian of the Year Awards. So they came to my school in the summer holidays a year and a bit ago, and we shot this, and they said, hey, how can we make this look like you're a maths teacher? Can we get like some textbooks and stuff? And I'm like, I hate textbooks. And people hate textbooks. Can we do something else? So that shape there on the background, can you see that? It's hard because it's fuzzy and it's a bit blurry. But that's an icosahedron, one of my favorite shapes. And it took me longer to construct because there's individual pieces that are held by magnets. And this is what I'm known for. I'm known for maths. But I actually also qualified at university to teach software design and computing studies. And it was in the middle of uni, being a student teacher, teaching these 14 and 15-year-old kids how to code in Python. I was teaching them these skills, and it sort of dawned on me that these skills, as they came out of these ideas, these concepts and pieces of knowledge, as they came out of my mouth, were becoming obsolete as I spoke them. And I sort of went through this existential crisis of thinking, what does it all mean? Why does it matter if I'm teaching these kids things that are completely irrelevant, not even in 5 years' time, like literally right now? So I went through a real sort of soul-searching phase through there. Ended up not doing that for family reasons, but that's always something which has been sort of rattling around in the back of my mind.
Okay, great. You also briefly spoke about having empathy for your students. And so it's a well-known story as when you were teaching, you wanted to, there was a student who was seriously ill and you decided to do a video of your class so that he could watch it?
Yeah. You said, when you said empathy, I think you had it right because, a few people put their hands up before when Brad asked, did you like maths? For the rest of you who felt like, no, it would be a complete fraud for me to put up my hand, I'm with you. I didn't find that mathematics sort of clicked in my brain automatically. I was that kid who's kind of like, Mr. Chan, can you explain it again? I still don't get it. And then he would just give me an explanation that was slower and louder, but exactly the same words. And I'm like, I'm not a foreign tourist. I'm a confused student, So for me, it didn't grab onto me. And so why did I start talking about this? I can't remember. You were talking about, I just got lost in a story.
So how your videos took off.
Oh, that's right. So because I knew, thanks, Brad. He's good at his job, isn't he? Well done. Because I knew that so many students, I would say the average student, does not understand mathematics immediately. Not just by opening a book, looking at the lines in the textbook and like, oh, of course it makes sense, right? I wanted to give him something better than just, here's chapter 5, off you go. Good luck, we'll see you in a month after your chemotherapy is done. I wanted to give him something that was more personal. What I wanted when I was at school was someone to guide me step by step. And that was the closest I could think of giving it to him. And so it's just been bizarre from those beginnings to see where it's gone now. 35
million views and counting.
It's kind of bananas,
yeah. I'm going to take a pause now, and we're going to use an app called Slido, which allows the audience to pose some questions. We're not going to have time to answer all the questions, so I'm going to be the person or the moderator that gets to choose and ask those questions. But if you want to help me along and pose some questions, which I can see on the screen behind Eddie, we might be able to get through some of those. So I'll keep going with some other questions. So, dealing with fame. So, I'm interested, and I read your brother mention that fame is a bit of a double-edged sword for you because it's also meant it's taken you away from the things that are important to you. We read earlier about all the things you're doing, and the question is, when do you sleep? Or do you get enough sleep? But it also means there's a trade-off to other things that are important to you. Can you tell us how you manage to deal with all those different things, all those conflicting things taking up your time?
Brad, I love that your question, it kind of presupposes and assumes that I have worked out how to deal with all those things. So I wish I had a good answer. I wish I had a better answer to this. I often tell my... in high school, when students hit that sort of year 11, 12 stage, and they put in their senior uniform, whatever that might look like, maybe like a tie or something like that, and suddenly this world opens out to them. They have all these cool opportunities, and I have to caution them and say, you know what, you have all these great things you can do. You have all these doors that are open, but you're rapidly coming to this point where you are much more defined, not by what you do, what you say yes to, but the things you say no to. And as an example, I have 3 children, which we haven't really mentioned, but they're aged 10, 8, and 5. And my oldest child, my daughter, she was born in my first year of full-time work, which was either brilliantly or terribly planned, depending on your point of view. But as a consequence, a lot of my friends at that point, they were like, cool, I'm working, disposable income, no responsibilities. So they went and did, the stereotypical tour of Europe and that kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just didn't do it because I chose not to do that. I chose to have kids instead. And I don't regret that at all. But for me, it's this constant... I think that we talk about work-life balance. I think that's a really dangerous phrase to throw around because I don't know if such a thing exists. It almost pictures like there's a set of scales and there's like some magical amount of things that you can put on each side and it's just like, ta-da. And I don't know, especially in the environment, the culture that we live in, I don't know if such a thing is possible. For me, I know it's going to sound a bit weird. The metaphor I much prefer is tension. Tension sounds like a bad thing. But I play the acoustic guitar, and anyone who plays a stringed instrument knows tension can be actually a really wonderful thing. Tension is what allows a guitar or a piano or a violin to make music. And so for me, I want to be tugging gently at the ends of my life to make sure I'm being the best dad and husband I can be, but also there's just all these wonderful opportunities and a great need out there. There's 2,207 public schools in New South Wales. Can you tell I say that number a lot? And so for me to be able to do as much as I can, not just to look after my own school of 2,000 students, but there's 2,000 plus schools, that's a need that's crying out to me, and I want to be able to do as much as I can to help that.
Yeah, it's a push-pull relationship, isn't it? Yeah. And I should mention your kids. So you've got 3 beautiful kids, all in primary school this year. Had some struggles in the early days with allergies and eczema and anaphylaxis, and we spoke about that the other day. So, requiring maybe more parenting time than, say, other kids. So again, how do you manage that? How do you manage also to be present for those things?
I think I'm going to call back on my background in an agricultural high school, which I know is a weird place to go, but at James Roos, I studied 5 years of agriculture. My year was actually the first year where it was not compulsory to do it for the HSC, but we'd all done so many years of it and broken our backs, carrying crops of potatoes home. So we're just like, yeah, just finish it, right? And so one of the things I learned from doing so much agriculture and horticulture was, when you plant a seed, you don't make that seed grow. There's nothing you can do. There's no power that you have or that a farmer has to make that seed grow. The power is in the seed itself. And you can do things to help. You can water and you can cultivate and you can provide trellises and weed things and all that kind of thing. But really, I just think it's fascinating. Just a seed just springing to life almost out of nothingness. And, I think that as parents, we can sort of fall into this really terrible spiral of guilt, because there's always more stuff that we can do for our children. Children are not like objects that we output in a factory, and there's 87 steps that you do, and then once you put the engine in, and then the car doors on, and then the windows, and then you just send it out, and it's finished. Children are never finished. I'm still hassling my dad all the time, right? But that, in some senses, is the joy of it, that we get to continue having this wonderful, profound impact on our children. And we should know not to wear the burden of, your children will not grow without you. They will. Sometimes, with some of the parents I interact with, they grow better without their parents. But the point is, we have an opportunity as well as a responsibility to help that. And I think that's, for me, I know I get to read with my kids and hang out with them and play Monopoly and make them upset when someone wins and everyone else loses. That's just part of the joy of watering and cultivating. And I can't do it all, but I can have the opportunity to make a difference where I can.
Great. Speaking about the challenge of raising kids, there's a question, one of the early questions about maybe an older child and getting them motivated to do maths or to enjoy maths or to spend time on maths. What advice would you give to a parent of a child or an older child who's probably not so motivated?
I think my first response to this is to make a parallel, a comparison between mathematics, which we're talking about here, and music, or even food, right? When you give someone a plate of food, or you play them a piece of music, if their response to that is, I don't really like that, then you wouldn't say, oh, I guess you're just not an eater. Or I guess you just hate music. You just universally despise this discipline that has been a creative expression of humanity for its entire history. That's not our response. We would say, oh, there must be some other food. There must be some other kind of song, some other artist that you would like. And if we want to have our child, student, parent engage in that and enjoy it, what we're going to do is we're going to go searching for what that other thing is. And so in mathematics, we often think of mathematics as this monolithic single structure, but actually it's very diverse. It's as diverse as cuisine and as music. Some kids are great with numbers and others hate them, and they're much more into shapes. And others are not into numbers or shapes at all. They're much more into puzzles and trying to unravel the language of why, poetry is intensely mathematical, because there's rhythm in every syllable that you write. There's a corner of mathematics that I'm confident this 16-year-old loves. They just don't know it yet. So I think for me, sorry to do this, but that's kind of why I wrote this book. There's huge parts of mathematics that no one even knows are part of mathematics. I didn't know when I was at school. If I had discovered that, if I'd had someone told them, I would have enjoyed the subject a lot more and a lot earlier. So I think the responsibility is on us to try and find those things.
Okay, and I think that partially answers the question from the 10-year-old about, tell me why maths is so important. Because
Can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah, go for it.
This is something which I gave a TED Talk last year. I don't know how many of you know what TED Talks are or have watched them. One of the things about TED Talks is it's a big talk in a public space, and they say, the organizers, the curators, they say, look, this is just not good for good presenters. This has to be an idea that's unique or that's shown in an experience in a unique way. If you don't have one of those, that's fine. Just don't give a TED Talk. It can't be something that you've presented to teachers hundreds of times. It's got to be something new. So I spent a long time, and the idea that sort of crystallized in my brain, which I want to say to this 10-year-old whose question has subsequently disappeared, is that mathematics is a sense. You know what our senses are, right? We can see, we can hear, we can taste, we can touch. What's the other one? We can smell. I have a really poor sense of smell. That's why I always forget it. These are ways to perceive the world, right? Now, mathematics is like that. Mathematics is a way to perceive when we look around us, when we admire a piece of art, and we say, wow, that's beautiful. That really looks amazing. But why? I'll put money on the table that there is mathematics that explains why. There is symmetry. There are patterns there that give us an explanation. Mathematics helps us perceive all these kinds of things around us that are invisible otherwise, which we can appreciate more deeply if we understand it. In addition to being incredibly useful and practical, that's the thing I love most about the subject.
Great. Every now and then you see these global rankings of where Australia sits in certain subjects like mathematics compared to the rest of the world. And, all the Asian countries are at the top. We're usually maybe somewhere in the middle. So there's a question about what changes would you make to our curriculum? Now, interestingly, you're actually in a role because you're employed by the Department of Education, and one of your mandates is to look at how do you get better teachers and how do we improve mathematics as a whole. So how would you answer that without going into too much detail?
That's a nice, simple question. Okay. I'm going to have to say two things. First, on the question itself, one of the tricky things about all these OECD rankings, PISA, Program for International Student Assessment, and TIMSS and all that kind of thing, one of the tricky things about them is that all measuring instruments are limited. All measuring instruments are limited. As an example, all of the assessment types that we do around the world, they're all time sensitive. You get an hour or an hour and a half or something like that. Now, it just so happens that huge parts of mathematical understanding and competency have nothing to do with how fast you can do things, have nothing to do with how quickly you can say 16 times 16 is 256. That's nice, but it is not the most useful thing in mathematics. The most useful thing in mathematics often is not being fast, but actually being able to slow down and look at a problem from a new and different perspective that no one has ever seen before. That's really costly and slow and difficult to measure. So I think what I would say is, firstly, we just need to be careful. I was speaking to someone, I went on a study tour of Singapore last year. It was very brief, it was only a week, but one of the people I was speaking to, he said, you have to be careful with these international comparisons because in some senses Singapore is winning a race, but it might be the wrong race. Are we measuring what really matters in that global environment? But I would say there are still changes that need to be made. I mean, this will be really, really fast, but in mathematics, we talk about 5 particular kinds of skills that we want our students to develop. We don't just want them to be really good at number crunching. We want them to be able to communicate effectively. We want them to understand and have deep insight into why things are the way they are. We want them to be flexible problem solvers. We want them to be able to reason logically, and we also want them to be fluent in mathematical facts. Now, those 5 things are all really important, but the way that we assess and the way that we teach often emphasizes that last one, fluency. How quickly can you do things and how accurately can you remember and memorize these things? I think what we need to really change is to restore that emphasis on these other things, to show that creativity and flexibility in our problem solving, that's really the heart of mathematical skill that's going to be relevant in the 21st century. That's where we need to shift our focus.
There's a big shift. There's a top question around what inspired you to become a mathematician, but I might, I guess, broaden the question and just ask you, what has inspired you to either become a teacher or a mathematician? What motivates you? What drives you to do what you do?
What drives me to do what I do is that...
or who?
The what is a who. For me, someone said to me once, one of my friends, who he was studying economics at the same university I was doing, and I was doing education, and he said, man, doesn't the idea of working in a school, this is before we got into school, doesn't the idea of working in a school sound really boring to you? Like, you have to teach the same syllabus over and over again every year. You have to write reports twice every year for all these hundreds of students. It just sounds like drudgery, like Groundhog Day with teenagers, like that sounds like someone's idea of torture, not something exciting. But for me, when I get to meet, like an average high school teacher teaches about 120 different students every year. And then next year we get a different 120. And getting to know who they are, and getting to know that unique cross-section of skills and passions that they have, and then getting the opportunity to help them grow those skills. I'll never forget the first time a student came to me 3 years after she'd graduated. And she just told me about, embarrassingly, I looked at her and I was kind of like, you look familiar, but I can't remember from where, because we meet a lot of students, right? And then she's like, oh, I was in your year 9 class. So it wasn't even like I wasn't her graduating teacher or anything like that. And can I just say, back when this happened, I was not a very good, I was in my early career. And that year 9 class, anyone who's do you remember what it was like when you were 15 years old? It's just like puberty and hormones, and it's just it's just gross in many ways. They're not cute and small anymore, and they're not grown up and can interact with you. Year 9's a hard year to teach. But she said to me, so I got this co-op scholarship. I'm going to move to New York, and there's all this like statistical analysis in my job now, and I couldn't do it without the maths that you actually taught me in year 9. And to know that that's a big deal, to have that kind of long-lasting impact on an individual's life, and then to be able to do that hundreds and thousands of times, that's what drives me. That's what makes all of the work worth it. I know I'm making a difference in the trajectory of a life and a family and a community.
Great. You just mentioned that there was a point where you didn't think you were a very good teacher. Every now and then you come across people who are at the top of their game, the top 1% of their profession, and I sort of see you in that position now. At what point...
It's just downhill from here, right?
Maybe. At what point did you feel confident that, you know what, I'm a pretty good teacher?
I think it was probably the first moment that a student didn't want to leave my class. Like the bell went, and he was like, no, but I want to know why. And I was like, don't worry, you'll get it next lesson. It's tomorrow. And he's like, no, I want to know why now. And it's a goal for all teachers to pique the curiosity of our students. But I'd never done it so successfully that it had come back to bite me. And I was like, no, go. I've got like work to do. And he's like, no, I need an explanation now. And for me, like that took a long time. I remember I was a classroom teacher for 6 years before I became a head teacher and being responsible for a team of 20 mathematics teachers at my school. And when I saw the ad come up for this head teacher job, my principal said, hey, did you see that ad? And I was like, yeah, I saw the ad. And she said, no, have you seen the ad? Are you going to apply for this? And I was like, are you serious? Like, look at my head teacher, and then look at me. You think I can do his job? Are you kidding me? And for a long time, I was just kind of, just fake it till you make it, I guess. And for me, coming to realize, I got to that point, I think a second sort of realization was I went to a university, and I was working with some pre-service teachers, and I said, oh, hi, I'm Eddie. I've been teaching for 7 years. And there was this look in the room, and they were kind of like, these are like second and third year university students. They're like, I can't imagine doing anything for 7 years. You must be so old, And I realized, I'm the next generation already. And these guys are just kids, and they need someone to mentor them the way I was mentored. And I think it was that kind of passage of time, those moments where I realized I had something to offer. That was the tipping point.
Okay, and it's interesting you mentioned you had to get pushed a little bit for a leadership role. And we spoke again in the car, again, being of Asian background. Often the people you work with of Asian background don't have those leadership aspirations. Maybe they need to be pushed more like you did a little bit. What's your view on that?
This is really tricky to answer. It's one of those ones where it's sort of one of the situations where there's clearly no black and white, I don't think. We were talking about selective schools before. There are lots of very, very valid criticisms of the way the selective high school system works and the way people game it and what it produces. But at the same time, I know I would not have worked half as hard in studying and trying to push myself had I not been surrounded by people who constantly challenged me. And I looked at them and I just couldn't help but think, I really got to lift my game here, Now, in terms of pushing people out of their comfort zone, I absolutely think, in general, I think that, we're a risk-averse people in so many ways. And there are so many opportunities that we miss because there is a danger there's a huge danger of failure. And in my first year as a head teacher, that was not a risk of failure. There were just lots of failures of me learning how to manage staff and lead them effectively and confidently. I just didn't have those skills. But we have to be willing, I think, to take those risks, and sometimes it requires someone to push us a little bit. And I'm really grateful that I had mentors that helped me do that. Great.
Still have mentors?
Yeah, I think that, I'm a big believer that life is too short to only learn from your own mistakes. You have to learn from others as well. So I'm really grateful that I've got people who I can always hassle them and knock on their door and give them text them and say, hey, what would you do here? Tell me how stupid I'm being on a scale of 1 to insane, and I constantly look for advice from those people.
Okay. I'm going to go to one of the questions at the bottom now. I'm going to take a risk here because I can only see half the question, so I'm assuming it's a good one. But what would be your advice for someone on a career path who's considering becoming a teacher? What are the skills they need to work on?
one of the trickiest things about being a teacher is how many hats a teacher has to wear. On any given day, you are an academic and a researcher and a coach and a jury and a logistics organizer and a counselor and a conflict resolution coach, and you are all these things. So in lieu of giving you a really long, stupidly, impractically long list, I would say that there is one thing which I find with all the hundreds of teachers who I've gotten to work with and help grow, there is one thing I find which is very difficult, I could almost say impossible, but it's very challenging to teach and to develop if it's not there, at least in seed form. And that's a love for children. I remember when I was a student teacher and I walked into my first staff room, and it was weird, you know. I'm only like 20 years old, so I'm fresh out of high school, and I'm suddenly on the other side of the curtain, and it was kind of, oh, wow, I'm listening to all the conversations that I wasn't allowed to hear before. And it was kind of bizarre, and I was sitting there, my supervising teacher was off teaching a class that I wasn't involved in, and I overheard this conversation a couple of rows away, and it slowly dawned on me that these two teachers who were talking, they hated children. Like, they just didn't like small people. And they were relishing how much they hated this particular kid and how difficult and I was kind of like, why are you here? It's not for the pay. Why are you here? And not just why are you here, like, this is bad for you. This is bad for the kids. I went to a regional area a few months ago with the Department of Education. I do a lot of travel around New South Wales, and I was teaching a bunch of kids about, you know, different ways of thinking about mathematics. And there was some teachers in the corners of the room watching. And when the lesson ended, the workshop finished, and some of the teachers stayed behind. One of them, she was quite close to retirement age, and she said, "God, I wish she'd been around when I was younger." She was not a maths teacher. She said, when my math teacher taught us, this is the way she taught us. She would say, "Okay, everyone, I'm going to give you a problem. I'll give you a minute or two to work out your answer. And once you have your answer, I'd like you to write that answer on your hand. Give you a couple minutes, go ahead and work on it." And then all of the children, you know, this teacher and all of her peers would work on it. And then she'd say, "Okay, everyone, hold up your answers, please." So everyone would raise their hand. And this teacher's teacher would go to the front of the room, and from her desk, she would pick up her cane. Now, if you're a younger person in the room and you don't know what a cane is, it's a really long stick that you hit people with, and it hurts. And any child who had the wrong answer written on their hand never forgot for the rest of their lives that that answer was wrong because it was marked with a pretty nasty bruise. Now, for me, to look at teachers having done that, that teacher clearly had it out for those kids. And if you cannot find it in your heart to look at snotty, confused, sometimes really upset and unable to control where they're at adolescents, if you can't find that in yourself, then you're not going to have a fun time. And you're also not going to be very effective. And so that's got to be. That's the keystone. I can develop almost any other skill that a teacher needs to develop, but that's the one from which everything else is built.
Okay. Do you think if you implemented the simple solution of raising salaries for teachers, that would result in better quality teachers?
The short answer to that question is no. One of the tricky things about education is that it is such a multifaceted and complex situation that there are no simple solutions. And that's, while I think it absolutely is an important part, because, you know, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. I absolutely think it's crucial, but there are so many other factors. You know, money's one thing, but the way that a culture views a profession of any kind is hugely decisive. You know, a lot of my friends who are doctors, they don't actually make a huge amount of money. But there is huge value and dignity placed on the medical profession. There is huge trust invested in it. You know, my staff, my 20 staff, if they want to print something on colored cardboard, I can't just tell them, "There's the cupboard." I can't just hand them colored cardboard. I have to send them to the print room where the coloured cardboard is locked up, where they can request a certain number of pieces of cardboard and then they get it and then they can print. That's not respect for a profession. That's mistrust. And so for me, remuneration is a huge part of things because that's how as a culture we imbue value in something, right? We say, hey, this is really important and we don't just want anyone. We think this is really difficult to do. But there's so much other work to do peripheral to that, which will contribute to the rise of the teaching profession.
Right. I suspect your doctor friends telling you they're not making much money might be lying to you.
But my wife is his accountant, so it's okay. I know that for a fact.
There's a question from Jeff around, when we're younger, we're often told to follow our passions. What he's hearing from you is don't necessarily follow your passions, but I think what's driving you is following the need to serve or wanting to serve a different purpose, being more purposeful. What's your advice for people on discovering that?
In some ways, this is the simplest question I've had all night, in some ways, but it's the hardest to actually do. Simplest to answer, hardest to do. You have to be willing, and of course, not everyone has the opportunity to do this, I should point out, but you have to be willing to try out all kinds of different crazy things. Things you would never have guessed might be actually useful to you. I went and did English Extension 2 when I was in Year 12. I endured Pride and Prejudice for 5 long hours in English Extension 1 so I could do English Extension 2 because when I was in Year 8, I entered this writing competition. And I didn't really think I had much of a shot, but my teacher said, you should give this a go, see what happens. And I did like decently okay. She said, hey, you've got something here that you should cultivate. And if I had not gone out on a bit of a limb and been willing to say, oh, okay, there are other skills that I might be able to cultivate, which, here's the important fact, might be useful to others. That ability to communicate and use language carefully is something which is crucial to what I do every single day and what I'm doing literally this second. So for me, that ability to not just say, this is what I want to do because this is what I like doing, being willing to cultivate those other skills around that, that's where you can actually start being useful. And that's what we're all about. Every profession exists to serve community and help human beings flourish. So we want to be as well-rounded as we can so we can help that.
Okay, so great. So going to the bottom question, how do you encourage introverts and culturally diverse students, a lot of them being introverts, how do you get them to speak up when it's difficult for them? Do they have to speak up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, okay, there's a few things I would say to this. I'll try to be brief. I often have to, there's so much, there are so many valid reasons why we take our perhaps natural inclination not to speak up or not to ask questions or not to participate. And there are so many things that contribute to that and reinforce that. I'll give you a good example. I was saying before, if a student gives me an answer in a classroom and it's not the answer I was looking for, right? We often get lots of subtle signals. My daughter has taught me so much about this. She's 10 and she said to me, Daddy, I'm not great at mathematics. And I said, how did you work that out? Did the teacher say, or did you do a test or something like that? And she said, no, I can see the way my friends look at me when I'm put up my hand or I say something or I write something in my book or I write it on the whiteboard that I hold up. And I think this is part of why, girls are so much faster and better at doing this than boys are. My boys are I got the wrong answer. I don't even know what anyone else thinks about me, and so they just become marvelously impervious to other people's poor opinions of them. But that reinforcement socially is something which we need to be careful about as parents, as a teacher. But then what do we do, kind of individually, right? How do we actually encourage ourselves? I think a huge thing is to think about what is lost when we don't. I say to my students all the time, people might preface a question by saying, hey, I think this is a dumb question. And I say, you know what? The only dumb question is the one that isn't asked because it doesn't get an answer, right? And when people realize, oh yeah, it may sound a bit silly, I should know this, but actually it's so much more of a detriment to me to never seek out a full understanding of something. That's oh, okay, that makes sense that I should be willing to go out on a limb. Simple little things like, Brad, suppose I got a coin out of my wallet, okay, and made a bet with you, okay? I'm not actually going to do this. Let's just make it a thought experiment, okay? And I'm going to get my coin out. Here it is. And I am going to flip this coin in a second, okay? And when I flip it, I'll let you call, okay? And if you're successful in calling it, it was tails, too late. Anyway, if you're successful, I'm going to give you $10. But if you fail, you have to give me $2. Okay, 10, 2. Now, this is something which has been experimented on, has been shown time and time again, that because of something called endowment theory, right? Many people will turn down this offer of winning $10 but losing $2. And the reason why is because psychologically you're like, but if I didn't play this game, I was not going to risk losing $2 at all, even though it's only $2, right? Even though the odds are so much in your favor and you have so much more to gain, right? We're very reluctant to take this wager. Now, that's if it's one game. But if I said, okay, let's play 100 games of this. Let's play 100 games. Flip, 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 right? This is now not about psychology. This is about numbers. It's literally stupid to not take that bet 100 times because 100 times, on average, you'll win 50 times and you'll lose 50 times. So I'm going to give you $10 50 times and you're going to give me 2. And this is a metaphor for risk-taking, right? Of course, when you take a risk, you stand to lose something. But do you stand to gain more? Of course, we feel the pinch of potentially losing $2, of potentially putting up our hand and looking like an idiot in the boardroom. But what do we stand to gain? Do we stand to introduce an idea into our team that's actually, it's so crazy and people wouldn't consider it, that actually that's why it's going to be useful, because so few people have tried implementing it before, right? So for me, that way of encouraging it is to see there really is, this is so much in my interest, it is worth taking those risks and sticking my neck out. And actually, the more you do it, it's a self-reinforcing behavior. You start to experience those benefits, and then you're more bold to do it next time.
Okay, so focusing more on the benefits than the costs.
Absolutely.
And also stepping out of your comfort zone. Great. And while you were talking about your daughter and not liking maths, I imagine there would be a bit of pressure on your kids to be good at maths.
What gives you that impression, Brad? There is, and for me this is actually really sad because as we've mentioned to you tonight, my real natural thing when I was young was reading. That's what I love to do. And so unsurprisingly to me, my kids are natural readers, and you know, my son has read, he's 8, and he's read the Harry Potter series like 1 billion times, and he's like, hey daddy, who's your favorite captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team? And I'm like, I don't know any of the captains of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. But they're super into that. But for me, what's most important is to emphasize to them that in mathematics, mathematicians are not people who find maths easy. They're the ones who enjoy how hard it is. And that's what helps them develop that perspective and that resilience. And so I'm encouraging them, and I'm very confident that whatever set of skills that they have, which they're great at, they'll be able to find them. But I think the important thing is to persevere and not give up.
Great. And I think it's fair to say your book isn't necessarily for maths lovers. It's for people that are just interested in life and how things work. And you spoke about endowment theory. And you speak about a lot of different things in here. Why aren't left-handers extinct, and why are rainbows curved, and different things like that? Yep.
Yeah, for me, so when I was at school and didn't really love maths, I still learnt it, and I was good enough at turning the handle that I could get decent marks. I just never really appreciated what it was about. And then when I became a teacher of this subject, I then subsequently learned all these things about the subject. I was kind of like, why did nobody tell me these cool things? And so that's why I wrote this book. And in fact, Jenny Brocky, she's from the SBS. She's a journalist. And I'm friends with her, and I said, hey, I've written this manuscript. Would you mind reading it for me? And she said, what's the book about? And I said, maths. And she said, you know I don't like maths a whole lot, right? And I said, I know. That's why I want you to read it. And that's why she wrote the first endorsement that I put on the back of the book. And I'll just read the front of it. She said, I never thought I'd read a maths book cover to cover, let alone sing its praises. I won't read the rest of it because it's embarrassing and cheesy. But for me, this is a book which I hope math lovers will like because it's got lots of maths in it. But my real target audience is those people who, like, what was the point of it? What was that all about? Does it have anything to do with our everyday lives? And the answer is yes, 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 yes. Let me show you how.
Okay, and I'm just chuckling a little bit looking at one of the questions that came up, which is, why is maths so hard? Now, you're arguing that it's not hard. It's interesting that it's come from Anonymous.
Yeah, no. That's telling, isn't it? No, can I clarify on that? So I would never say that maths is not hard. In fact, I think part of what makes it very worthwhile is precisely because it is challenging and it pushes us. But I think there are many answers to this, but here's the clearest one, okay? Mathematics is often placed parallel to English, right? Because kind of like literacy and numeracy, they're really core skills for functioning in everyday life. So we put them next to each other, and they even rhyme. Literacy, numeracy, they're kind of, in NAPLAN, right? That's the National Assessment Program for Literacy and Numeracy. And we pair them up together, and we do not often notice that they, in fact, in many ways, are opposite. Let me try and illustrate. When we learn to read, right, we learn to understand meaning from letters and from words. And if you pick up a book or a newspaper article and you can't understand 5% of the words that are in a newspaper article, you can still know what that article is about because you can infer meaning from context and from, this word looks a bit like this other word that I know about. So you can kind of fumble your way through it. And literacy, our language has developed in order to be that kind of, it's got redundancy built into it, right? You can not understand parts and that's okay. You'll pick up that meaning in other ways. But mathematics is exactly the opposite. Mathematicians love few things more than they love brevity and being succinct and efficient in our communication. We don't want to spend lots of time on long sentences like add up the infinite series of infinitesimally thin rectangles from this interval to this interval along this axis. We don't want to say that. That's like 50 words. Ain't nobody got time for that. I'd rather just draw a long S, and that'll capture it all. And what that means, though, is if, unlike reading 5% of a newspaper article, which is fine, you don't understand. If you don't understand 5% of an equation, you unfortunately don't understand anything about that equation because all of the meaning is so dense and balled into this tight, condensed space. So why is math so hard? You need all of the pieces. If I take out one piece of your knowledge and understanding, the whole house of cards collapses. So you need to have all those bits and pieces, which is why I often meet people and they're like, I was okay with maths until they started putting letters into it. And algebra was their undoing, and then they never got back on the horse. And so the interconnectedness of mathematics, which is beautiful, is also one of the things that makes it challenging to learn.
Okay, great. We're nearing the end of the evening. I'm just looking at a question at the bottom again from Shani. Now, Shani, similar to you, actually makes his living from an online business where he runs videos. Teaching people how to write. His question is, do you have online haters? So obviously Shani has some online haters. How do you feel about it? How do you cope with it? Jeff? Sorry. Eddie?
Yeah. That's a great question. The most direct way I can answer that is to say, yes, Shani. Yes, I do. There you are. One of the reasons why is when the internet's a big place, right? And the law of large numbers means that when you have a big enough place, even if there's a group of people that's a teeny, tiny proportion of the population, the internet is big enough that even though proportionally there's not many of them, on the internet, there's lots of them. There's lots of them. And so for me, because I teach mathematics, this is something which everyone and their dog is like, nope, that was a dumb way to teach that. There's a smarter way of, etc., a clearer way of showing something. And here's the thing, right? If you haven't seen my videos, you don't need to, but they're not me purpose filming a video. They're me in my classroom with my students in front of me. I'm not like reading off notes and then like, oh, here's the thing on my script. I don't have a script. It's just me and the kids. And so I'm a human being. I make mistakes all the time. I fix them, but I do make them. And so I have those people who feel it is their duty in life to point out and tag. It's like 357, forgot to write the minus sign. I'm like, thanks, that's great. I can't do anything about that now. How do I cope with them? I'd say two things. Number one, You know how they say don't feed the trolls, right? It's because the trolls will keep on eating forever, and then they will. What do they say? Never have an argument with a stupid person because they'll bring you down to their level, and then they will beat you with experience. So I think it's really important not to fall into that trap, because that's kind of a time sink that you could just spend your entire life in. The main way that I cope with this psychologically, when about a third of the comments on my YouTube channel are, why is that Asian guy talking in a weird accent? And what is that weird accent? That's about a third. A large part of the other proportion is like, oh, cool, thanks for posting this video. But it only needs to be a small fraction of those other ones who are saying, I don't like this video, or this is unclear, or can you do this or that, the other better? Can you try to suck less, For me, the way I psychologically cope with that is to remember the difference that I'm making positively in so many people's lives. And I'm a human being. I'm going to make mistakes and not be perfect, but I know that the net output, I think I passed 300 million hours of watch time not that long ago, which to me is just bananas. I went and calculated. I teach hundreds of hours of teaching every year, but when you do the calculation, people who are voluntarily coming to watch these videos, this is millennia of me teaching for my if I'm lucky, I might get another 35 years in my teaching career before I kind of fall over and kick the bucket. But this is something which is going to continue beyond my capabilities, helping people learn perhaps forever if YouTube ends up working out how to do that in the future. So for me, how I actually cope with it is to realize, yeah, okay, there's some people who aren't happy with it, but I am making this huge positive difference in improving people's lives nonetheless.
Great way to look at it. You might have to give Shani some counselling a little bit later. I think I have 1 more minute left, so I'm going to move from online trolls to something a little bit deeper. Question about what kind of legacy you want to leave. Can you answer this pretty briefly?
The legacy I want to leave is...
There was a question there about legacy.
Yeah, I see it. It's there in the middle. Steve, thanks for that question. I would love it if, looking back, people will look at my life and the net output and say, there was a difference made in the lives of individuals and at a cultural level about the way we think about learning, the way we think about mathematics, the way we think about school. That's what I would love. But to be honest, the legacy that I know I'm leaving behind, and I want to emphasize it, is that, societies and civilizations and cultures and companies and organizations and governments, they are all mortal. They'll be around for 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, and then they will disappear and will be forgotten in history. But individuals, at least this is my conviction, they're going to be around forever. And so for me, the difference that I can make in a single person's life, that's a legacy which, in a real sense, there is nothing bigger than a single human being whose life I can affect profoundly. And that's why, there's all this effort. This comes back to the why question, what motivates me. It's being able to look someone in the eye and know you're going to think something differently and go on a different path in your life for the next year, 10 years, 30, 40 years, because of the little positive impact I got to make on your journey. That's the legacy I want to leave behind.
Fantastic, and I think we can all see that you're doing that already. So thank you, Eddie. Thank you for your time. Please give Eddie a round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to the audience also for participating and being here tonight. I will mention, just before Thurinder from PDF comes up to give a vote of thanks, Eddie will be hanging around. He's brought some of his books tonight to sell, $25 on one of these tables around here, cash only.
I have to apologise, I'm not an actual bookseller, so I don't have one of those fancy FPOS machines. Sorry about that. I do have change though, so if that helps.
But it's better than buying it from Dimix or anywhere else, because he'll autograph it, and you can probably get a selfie with him as well, which I know is important for a lot of you. Just to mention as well, the next Inspiration series is on March 14th. We have Dr. Charlie Teo coming for that as well. So,
wow.
Yeah, register for
that. That's a good snag. Good work, team. I'm just the warm-up act. Cool.
I might invite Kirinder.
Thanks, Brad. Definitely bring out one of the most insightful interviews, as always. Eddie, he's probably been the most interesting speaker we've had in the past 10 years. He definitely gives Mike Beard a run for his money. On behalf of PDF and Haymarket HQ, we'd like to give you this to Eddie. And as Brad mentioned, thanks to Don and the books, you could go, and it's $25 cash. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for coming.